set up a perimeter, but it's clear that we are completely surrounded by Russian forces.
These are measures that will continue to increase the costs on Russia and on those responsible for what is happening in Ukraine.
In February 2014, Russia invaded and annexed Crimean Peninsula away from Ukraine. Are you concerned about what's going on right there, right now? Is there going to be a war? Is this war going to affect your investments? If you're keen and if you're concerned, continue watching on. When Putin came into power in 1999, NATO only had 19 members. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization and includes US and many European powerhouses. Right now, NATO has 30 members, and 3 of them are actually former Soviet republics, such as Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. NATO promises to come to any of its members' aid if it is threatened. And for hundreds of years, Ukraine was actually part of the Russian Empire. But when USSR collapsed, 92% of Ukraine citizens voted to become independent. However, in 2013 November, Ukraine, under its president Viktor Yanukovych, rejected the European Union for closer ties with Russia. That brought about large-scale protests, and he was eventually removed from power and impeached. Then in February 2014, Russia invaded Crimea, and Crimea is actually part of Ukraine. Then came the Crimean status referendum in 16 March 2014, where the majority of local population voted to join Russia. Russia formally annexed Crimea, which means to claim ownership of it, on 18 March 2014, and incorporated the Republic of Crimea and federal city Sevastopol, which is a strategic naval base, as the 84th and 85th federal subjects of Russia. The impact of Ukraine's energy market has been significant. It's reported that Ukraine has actually lost 80% of oil and gas deposits in the Black Sea and a significant part of its port infrastructure due to the annexation of Crimea. In 2014, the US and its allies in Europe moved slowly in response to Russia's aggression. That sprang the US to kick Russia out of the G8 grouping of countries, and Russian leaders and multinational companies actually faced sanctions. However, that wasn't enough to deter Russia. Just like any war conflict, there's always some history to things. Russia's tension now with Ukraine is nothing new, and Russia has actually taken something away from Ukraine before, which is the Crimea Peninsula. In Putin's eyes, NATO is trying to expand its influence too much, and is concerned that Ukraine could eventually join NATO also. NATO's expansion right up to Russia seems to be his last straw. Hence, in his list of demands, he names banning Ukraine from entering NATO as a key component for negotiation. You may be thinking, could this be all posturing? Or will sanctions be too painful for Russia to hold? Would they be concerned enough such that they will backtrack? If you're thinking along the lines, think again. Because Russia has actually faced sanctions many times. And these sanctions, which were first started in 2014, were only slowly lifted towards 2019. Whether it becomes a full-scale war or not, nobody knows for sure. But one thing is certain, markets hate uncertainty. Which leads to the next point. If you stay invested, will your investments get hurt? I'll answer that question right up front. Yes, indeed. If a war is to break out, your portfolio is likely going to dip. If we look in terms of history, we've seen that on average, that day that the event happened, markets on average lost 1.2%. The worst is on the US terrorist attack, which is September 11, 2001, and that actually saw a market plunge of 4.9%. And if you have been invested in markets for a period of time, you probably are thinking, this experience of seeing the market crash on the day of war breaking up is true because we've seen many instances of this happening. On that day of the war itself, there have been newspaper headlines that suggest that oil prices will surge further and that the impact of the war could be far-reaching. So it leads to the next question again. Should you start selling now? That is a difficult question that I'd like to help you answer. And before we get there, smash our like button. It's taken our team hours to do up this presentation for you, and hopefully it has nuggets of wisdom that can help you navigate this uncertain period. Ukraine's conflict in 2014 was not on this list. Did it also decline on that day itself? What we can learn from history is that markets actually started selling down towards end of January 2014. S&P 500 was 1,850, but it dropped all the way to 1,750. This is a 6-7% total decline. And the surprising finding is the sell-off actually started even before the war took place. And when Russia finally invaded Crimea, markets actually ended the correction. It rallied up from 3rd of February, and S&P 500 has actually saw a new high as early as end of March 2014. What is the key learning point? When everybody's anticipating pain, they are selling off early. And the actual event may actually be the bottom of the market correction. But before that, what if the war doesn't even happen? Markets would certainly celebrate, correct? And that leads to a quick conclusion. Selling off right now in order to avoid that pain of that day's drop is likely not a good idea. I repeat again, selling off in anticipation of the war is likely not a good idea. Let's look on for further data. We can see in this full summary is that most war declines last for several weeks. The average total decline is about 5% only. The worst decline is probably the Iraq invasion of Kuwait back in 1990. That correction took 3 months to bottom. S&P 500 was about 360 points, and the decline actually lasted for 71 days, correcting down all the way to 300 points. That was back in September 1990. The total loss of this bear market is about 16.9%. However, once that bottom was reached, you'd see that the market actually recovered strongly. And by the end of 1990, it's actually rallied back strongly and made a new high. The first thing you need to do now is to avoid selling and trying to hide, but instead, get ready to buy. I've shown you many examples of market corrections from war situations, and more often than not, they have recovered very strongly against all expectations. You know, markets actually anticipated a war and actually sold down before anything really happened. So what if we really do have a war? You can also guess that the market will react ahead of any news that the war is resolving, correct? Which means it will surge up before any positive sentiment is shown in the news. So the simpler way is just to avoid market timing. Don't sell out and try to rebuy it when the war is over. That is not likely a good idea. It's much easier to just stay the course, accept this 5% possible loss. It's not life-threatening in any case. And if you have spare cash, start to buy on such dips, because I've proven to you that these dips are typically very short-lived and an opportunity that you can deploy your money into good investment ideas. Now, if you agree with this, smash the like button and press on subscribe, because in the coming week ahead, I'll be reviewing the latest figures from our Singapore banks, which technically shouldn't see any impact in business from any war that's happening there. And I'll also be showing you some updates on the particular read that I'm keen on. So if you're interested, smash the subscribe and stay tuned for that release. With that, I'll sign off from this video and invite you to some previous tutorials that can help you further in your investment journey. Invest safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.